Good day, guys. This is your tutor engineer. Today we are continuing with our series on geometry. So let's start with today's lesson. In the diagram below, the line PQ makes an angle 45 degrees with the positive x-axis. QP is 2√2 units. N is 7 and 1, which is the midpoint for PR, and M is the midpoint for QR. Okay, so now what does that mean? We've been given that the length for QP is 7√2, and that N and M is the midpoint. That means these lines are parallel. Okay, now let us answer the first question. Determine the gradient for PQ. Okay, now the gradient for PQ, since we've been given that the line PQ is 45 degrees, the gradient is equal to tan 45 degrees, which will give us 1. So that's the gradient. And then 3.2, determine the equation of Mn in the form of y is equal to mx plus c. Okay, since we've established that QP is parallel to Mn, that means here our M is 1. So we can write y is equal to 1x plus c. And then we're going to use the coordinates of n, which is 7 and 1, to calculate for the value of c. So let's do so. The y coordinate is 1, the x is 7 plus c. That means c is going to be 1 minus 7, which is going to be minus 6. Therefore, we can conclude that the equation for Mn is y is equal to x minus 6. Okay, now let's go to question 3.3. Determine the length for Mn. Okay, the length for Mn, since M and N are both midpoints, that means you can write and say Mn 2 times Mn is equal to QP. Since you know that QP is 7 times √2, that means you'll divide by 2 on both sides. That means Mn will be equal to 7√2 over 2 units. So that's the length for Mn. Now let's go to question 4. Given that PQRS is a parallelogram, determine the length for RS. Okay, now we've been given that PQRS is a parallelogram. That means the opposing sides are parallel. Now, to calculate the length for RS, that means if you continue this line, it's also going to be the midpoint. Okay, let me just use a different color so that it's clear. This will be the midpoint, alright? That's going to divide PS into half. So that means we can say RS, you can say 2 times this line, right? So this line is the same as Mn, right? So let's call this M prime, right? So M prime N is equal to RS. Since M prime N is the same as Mn, we've already calculated Mn as 7√2 over 2 units. That's RS, or RS is equal to 7 root 2 units. Right, that's one way of calculating RS. And then the easiest way, you could have easily said the opposing sides of the parallelogram are equal. So you can just deduce and say RS is equal to QP, which is equal to 7 root 2 units. The reason for that, opposing sides of a parallelogram, right? So that's another way of, easiest way of calculating for RS. Okay, now let's go to, now let's write RS here. It is 7 root 2 units. Let's go to question 5. Determine the coordinate of S such that PQRS in this order is a parallelogram. So now let's calculate for the coordinate of S. How are we gonna do that? Okay, now let's choose a different color. Let's choose a purple color. In fact, let's choose an orange color. Okay, so we know that we have two coordinates Q and N, and the distance between Q, which is the horizontal distance between these two is going to be the distance. The x coordinate for N means that the distance to the y-axis for point N is 7, right? And the distance to the y-axis for point Q is going to be, the x coordinate is 2, right? So we can say the horizontal distance between Q and N is actually the sum 2 plus 7, which is 9. Okay, I'll show you where am I getting here. Because this 9 will be used to do the very same projection between N and S, right? That distance there between N and S will be 9 as well, which means we'll establish the coordinate of S by saying 7 plus 9 will give us the x coordinate of S, which is 16. Now let's do the same exercise for the y coordinate. The distance for N to the x-axis. Okay, now let me just choose a different color. Let's use green. The distance for N to the x-axis, that distance there is 1, right? Since I'm using the y coordinate for N. And the distance for Q to the x-axis is 3, since I'm using the y coordinate for Q, which means the distance between Q and N, the vertical distance would be, let me write here, between N and Q, the vertical distance would be 4, right? So the same thing applies when it comes to the vertical distance between N and S. Okay, let me write here, we'll have another 4 from N to S, which means you can get the y coordinate for S by saying 1 plus 4, which is 5, right? So that's the coordinates for S. Okay, now let's go to 3.5. Okay, we're done with 3.5. Determine the coordinates for P. So here is a P. Okay, I like to mix the colors a bit. Let's go purple now. Here is a P there. Now we know that the distance between P and Q is 7 root 2, right? So let's just construct a triangle between P and Q, here we'll draw a vertical line. So this is going to be a rectangle triangle. So since this one is 45, this angle is 45, here will also be 45, and then here will also be a 45 degrees angle. So we can say cos of 45, looking at this particular angle, is equal to, okay, I'm trying to find this side here, is equal to the hypotenuse is equal to, it's going to be the adjacent side, which is this. We can call this the adjacent side. Let's call it y, right? Let's call it y, and then let's call this one x. Okay, so we're going to say y divided by the hypotenuse side, which is root 2. So we know that cos 45 is 1 over root 2 by the definition of special angles. So that will give us y is equal to 7 root 2 over root 2, which is 7, right? Okay, so y here is 7. We know that you're going to get the same thing if you do the same calculation for x. So now the distance between Q and P, the vertical distance is 7 and the horizontal distance is 7. So which means in order to get to the coordinates for P, now let me choose another different color for the purpose of the answer. Let's go back to a red color, which means since I know that the distance between Q to the y-axis is 2 because of the x coordinate, that means the distance between the y-axis to P would be 7 minus 2, which is going to be a 5, right? So now I have the x coordinate for P, which is A would be 5. I'll do the same exercise for the y coordinate for P. The distance between Q and the x-axis, we've already established that it is 3. And then the distance between P and the, okay, which is going to be this distance between P to the x-axis is going to be 7 minus 3, which is a 4. So that will give us the y coordinates for P. So now we can answer this question and say P coordinate is 5 and 4. So I hope you understood. Now that's it. We've come to the end of today's lesson. Stay tuned on the next lesson. If you did like my lesson for today, please like and then subscribe. So we'll meet next time. Stay tuned and cheers.